Why is Jesus not the same as Santa Claus? The question ought not need to be asked, but it's a question or a statement that comes up perennially. Atheists equate belief in Jesus with a belief in Santa. They assume there's no proof for either. There's a distinct difference between the two situations in that nobody is looking for proof for Santa. It's a convention, a tradition. It's a concept or a idea we created for our own purposes. Jesus is believed in, and believed in very strongly, and the one part of the belief is that there's consequences for not believing. There's no consequences for not believing in Santa or the Tooth Fairy, and indeed the consequences for believing in them is visible in that if you believe in Santa as an adult, you aren't going to go buy presents for your kids. And if you believe in the Tooth Fairy, you're not going to put coins under the pillow for your children. Now, it can be argued that there's no evidence for Jesus. At the same time, not believing has consequences, whereas, as we say, it's the belief in Santa and the belief in the Tooth Fairy that has negative repercussions. It's the unbelief in Jesus that has the repercussions, and this is measurable, and it's been measured in terms of the impact that unbelief has on people. That's atheism. They have higher rates of depression, broken marriages, children out of wedlock, poverty, and so on. And one could argue they're not even as effective in science, since most Nobel Prize winners and science itself has been developed by believers. But the biggest problem perhaps we have regarding belief in Jesus is that the belief is quite minor. If we were to scale it, even those who believe or say they believe don't believe to the extent that Jesus requires. The church that is built out of the faith of Christians isn't the church that's described in the Bible. We don't hold all things in common. We don't not worry about tomorrow. We don't give to those who ask. We don't not ask for what we lent or what was taken from us. We don't ask for it. We don't not ask for it back or try to get it back. So we can't say that the benefits of belief are as visible as they would be if the belief was as concrete as it is meant to be. The big issue, or the big discrepancy, if you like, is that faith in Jesus only works if you have faith in him. So when we say there's no proof that Jesus exists, there isn't any if you don't believe in the evidence. To put this another way, the faith in the honesty of man doesn't exist if we don't trust anyone. Faith in your spouse doesn't exist if you have no trust in them, if you never trust them. It's one thing to say we don't need to trust gravity because gravity exists and we see it. We don't have to trust the table because we see the table and the table exists. There's an objectivity. And granted, Jesus isn't a material phenomenon, but then there's a lot of things that aren't. And tomorrow is not a physical phenomenon. And in many ways, gravity is not a physical phenomenon or objective in the way many atheists think it is, because while it's true we can drop a rock and it will always fall to the ground, this is never a guarantee. There's no absolute certainty that it is right. We don't have to have faith that it will, but there is faith that it will. There's faith that it will always drop, but we don't know. There's no absolute necessity for gravity to work. There's no absolute necessity for tomorrow to happen. So there is an inherent faith in our operations within the physical world. And one of those things is faith that we can go to work and the work will be there, and we can have relationships with people, and these relationships will follow a certain pattern. And by this we mean that if we're kind, people will be kind. If we say good morning, they'll say good morning. And that we have a certain sense of predictability with people, but there's no guarantee. It is a faith of how things will happen. If we act in a certain way, other people will act in a certain way. We think or believe if we go to work every day, do our job, and etc., that we will have a job and not get fired. This doesn't always work out. So there's a faith, there's an assumption, but it's not a provable one. In fact, it's provably to not be so. We can be the best worker but still get fired or still lose our job through one reason or another. So to trust in Jesus isn't something unique in the human frame of reference. There's a lot of things we trust. We have to decide for ourselves is whether having faith in Jesus is warranted. And like any relationship, we can only know this by trying it. We can't assume the outcome beforehand, and this is the dilemma atheists can't overcome. They can't get into the relationship without evidence that it's going to be worthwhile, but there isn't any evidence that a relationship is worthwhile until it's entered into. And the association, the becoming of a Christian is a relationship, and it's not evident that this relationship is worthwhile unless one is in it. It's like looking at the relationship that somebody else has with somebody and saying, well, you have this relationship, but I don't think it really works. I don't know if I want to get in. I want evidence that I should get into it. But what is anybody going to tell you? Because unless you are upholding your end to it, it's not going to happen. And the relationship that two other people have isn't the relationship you and they, or you and one of the others, are going to have. And so the faith that we have in Jesus isn't about an objectivity. It's about the relationship, but it matters as much to what we're bringing into the relationship as much as what Jesus is from what you say an objective or categorical sense. I mean, the definition of Jesus, the nature of Jesus, the being of Jesus doesn't tell us what our relationship is. Just Jesus is God, but that doesn't mean that he is automatically your Savior. It doesn't automatically mean he is in you or helping you or relating with you. It's the relationship requires your input. It requires your participation. So standing outside of a potential area of interaction and saying, I want evidence that this interaction, this relationship is going to be worthwhile, before you step into that circle of contact, it's just not, it's not rational. It's not going to produce any kind of result. It's, again, faith in Jesus is the result of a relationship with Jesus. It's not the result of logical calculation any more than any relationship is. So you can't treat Jesus as if he was a table or as gravity, and if you do, that faith is always contingent. It's always problematical and probabilistic. The only way you can have total faith in Jesus is by treating him who he is, by relating to him in the way within the framework of who he is, which is God and the only path to salvation. And until you do that, you can't have a relationship, and faith is out of the question, because you can only have faith in Jesus in terms of him being your Savior as the Son of God.